thank you. You just want a good grade. Yeah, a little bit. Oh, you know what I need? My clicker. I'm not very prepared, so my wonderful husband's going to bring it to me. Yay! Captain Stuart, y'all. Oh, gosh. Okay, y'all know I'm Mrs. Stewart, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about something I know, and that is relationships. Yeah. What is tomorrow? Yeah, the day of love. It's awesome. I'm so excited. You know, tomorrow they're going to spend $20 million on candy and flowers. I mean, that's kind of silly, don't you think? Do we even know why we celebrate Valentine's Day? St. Valentine's. But do you know about that? You see, this guy, Claudius, good-looking fella, he wouldn't let these guys, his soldiers, get married. And so, hey, can we turn the lights down just a little bit? Because I'm blinded. Oh, yeah, thanks. All right. So this guy wouldn't be married because, you know, if you're married, you're no longer really thinking about that emperor and his business. You're thinking about your family and love. So this guy comes along and he secretly marries the soldiers. So voila, we have a day of love and romance, or the worst nightmare for any single person. A day to be alone. Yeah, I felt that way a lot of times. It's not a lot of fun. So you see, last year, Mr. Harmon, he he gave us some insights into his loves. I have a few more because you see, there were just a few. There was Andy and Kelly and Larry and Terry and Billy, Larry again, and Mike, Will, Keith, Carol, Mark, and that was just till like junior high. So I was, you know, well liked. So where do we get that need for love? I had this just desire to be loved. Where do you normally get it? Yes, from a kid, you get it from your parents. When you're a child, that family. Well, I didn't necessarily always get love from my family. I searched in other places. Guess who that is? That's me, yep. I am a sophomore in high school. That's my first love. Willie. Yeah, but he was a senior. I was a sophomore. Okay, he was the captain of the football team. He was the captain of the baseball team. He was the man on campus. He was somebody, and I was his someone. Yep. Like I said, I wanted to be loved by someone because I didn't necessarily get it from my family, from my parents. That's how I felt. You see, my mom, you know, and I say this in all honesty, she did the best she could. But she was a World War II bride. Yeah, she was old by the time I came along. She was 16 when she got married. She had 5 kids. She popped them out every 5, 6 years. She didn't even like kids. By the time I came along, she was done. She didn't want anything to do with me. And so I kind of had to raise myself. It wasn't necessarily fun. It was kind of sad because imagine that little girl, 8 years old, that is not me, by the way, but 8, 9 years old, having to get up in a lonely, empty house in the morning and get ready for school by herself, fix breakfast by herself, fix lunch for school by herself. And let me tell you, mustard sandwiches. 2 pieces of white bread, some mustard, and every once in a while I could find some bologna to go on that. We didn't have a whole lot of money. And so I'd get on my bike, I'd ride to school, and I'd come home after school, and you'd kind of think there'd be somebody there to greet me. No, not always. There was no one there to say, "How was your day?" You know, those questions you hate from your parents. "How was school?" I didn't even have anybody to yell at me and say, "Sit down and do your homework." I would have loved that because that would have meant they cared enough to yell at me. So I was really sad when no one would tuck me in at night. No one said, "Good night, sweetie, I love you." No one would read me a book. And in fact, this is for Caitlin. Those were my choice of literature. Yeah, I didn't like superheroes. Archie and Casper were the best. And when I was a kid, I'd get on my bike and I'd ride up to Circle K, a long way away, and I would buy my reading material for the week, greatest literature known. And here I am teaching English. And this is what I would do because I didn't have that life. But don't get me wrong, I didn't have a bad life because it was fun, very fun-filled, and a lot of escapades because I don't know if you can see that very well, but that is Corpus Christi Beach. That's Padre Island. A lot of y'all have been there. That is the reason why my parents weren't ever at home because we didn't have a lot of money. My parents got this lease on Padre Island to build a park area, cabanas. Yeah, people paid money to come and stay in these things. There weren't hotels. There was no restaurants on the island. This was a long time ago. And actually, if you look at it, Bob Hall Pier has 3 T's. Today, there's only one because there was a big giant hurricane and blew it all away. So this was my stomping ground. My dad had a 1-bedroom apartment out there that I was able to stay the night in once in a while, especially on the summers. And I would just walk out onto the beach and I had total freedom. Great place to grow up. But you could get in a lot of trouble. I mean, I did learn how to wash dishes, sell shrimp, sell snow cones, but not together. And I did some pretty dumb things. Like these guys, oh, they were my friends, so I thought, because I was a little kid. And I used to swim shark bait out. Yeah, you know, it was really great. I would walk down to the end of this tee, because that right there is where they would shark fish. And they had a 20-aught hook, and it was about as big as I was. And they'd put a big hunk of tarpon on it, bloody and all that. And I'd walk down, get down into the water, get in my inner tube, and I'd swim out as far as I could, one-handed, of course. And I'd get out there, and I'd drop this hook in, and I'd come in, and they'd give me 50 cents. Whoa, I was rich. Where were my parents? I mean, you know, my parents probably could have been arrested for a lot of things, but that was really a stupid thing to do. And, you know, it probably wasn't a good time to grow up as a teenager either, hanging around with guys like that, because it was the time of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So I did what every teenage girl would do. There was David and Kevin and Keith and Peter and Sam and Chuck. I didn't like Chuck very much. There was another Larry and Thomas. Yeah, I just kept finding different boyfriends that I could find because I just wanted somebody to love me. And it was hard. So, you know, when I was growing up, my friends, I was very popular, by the way, because my friends would come to my house on Friday night. We didn't have any parents hanging around. They could do whatever they wanted. They could come over and smoke dope, drink, party. It was great. Everybody had fun. But that's not what I really wanted. I just wanted to be popular. And so on Saturday, though, I chose my friends very wisely, and I would go to their house. Because on Sunday morning, they would wake up as a family and go to church. And that was something so special to me, because we didn't go to church. And so I went with all my friends, and I went to Baptist, Nazarene, Methodist, Presbyterian, Catholic, you name it, I wanted to be in church on Sunday because God had a plan for me, unbeknownst to me. At the end of my 8th grade year, I accepted Christ. And of course, fairy dust, rainbows, everything was perfect. No. I did what any other girl would do. No music, Calvin. You blew it. Okay, I went looking for love in all the wrong places. And so I had a few more. There was Kevin and James and another Mark and a Terrence and a Thomas and a Chuck and a Chris and a Rich and, Rich's older brother. So, it wasn't always still hunky-dory because I was trying to do things my way instead of God's way. But God had a plan. It was amazing because God said, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, and so are you. And you know what God did? He took all of my sadness and all of my loneliness and all those experiences that I had, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and He gave me tools with which I would use later in life because He was going to give me one of the greatest gifts, an answer to prayer that I didn't even know I was praying for. Something exceedingly, abundantly more than that I could ever ask for, He gave me. The greatest family in the world, the United States Navy. Great big family. We are definitely one big family in this group. If any of you are thinking about going into the military, come see me because we can have a great chat. It was a family, all right. There were so many other people like me that were very independent because God gave me these wonderful gifts: determination, courage, flexibility, sacrifice, responsibility, and most importantly, independence or determination. Like Ellie would say, disagreeability. I'm disagreeable, yeah, I know. But God had a plan, and He took that and used that. And let me tell you, the Navy is a great life. He gave me all that to be a great Navy wife. Went to 5 continents, 52 countries. Do you know that's only 21% of the world that I've seen? It's amazing. Got to dine with ambassadors and important people. I actually got to stand right next to the Queen. We were there at the Royal Ascot. We got invited twice. Got to do some amazing things. But there were some hard times. You see, all of those gifts that God gave me through those experiences helped me because my wonderful husband wasn't always at home. He was out serving his country, doing his duty. In the first 19 years of marriage, he was gone 11 years, 4 months and 2 weeks, and then I gave up counting because, I couldn't count that high. So I had to be independent. I had to have courage. I had to have that responsibility because I was raising 4 kids on my own. I moved a lot. I just completed my 26th move. My kids had 6 schools in 8 years. I only had 1 kid that went to the same school for 4 years in a row while we were in the Navy. There were also some really sad times in the Navy. You see, I went to more funerals in the first 4.5 years of our marriage than most people go to in a lifetime. This is an A7 Corsair, single seat, single engine. It was an old plane. It's the workhorse of the Navy of Vietnam. All of these were accidents in those 4 years. It's what the Navy calls mishaps. This, I didn't update the thing. Well, that isn't my first house, but my other first house looked sort of like that. So my first house in Orange Park, Florida. And one afternoon, I was out hanging Christmas lights while my 2 little boys were sleeping. I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And I was in charge of a wonderful charity event, and I had collected a whole bunch of toys. And the next day, the CO's wife was going to come pick them up. And so I'm out hanging up Christmas lights, and up drives the CO's wife. And I'm thinking, whoa, she's here a little early. And sitting next to her, driving, was the commanding officer. And he was in his full dress blues. And I thought, oh, they're going to a change of command, they're going to a function, I don't know, but this is kind of nice. And right behind him drove up the head of the women's ministry at my church. Now, y'all probably know what happened. I didn't have a clue. It wasn't like the movies. I didn't know until Carol, the CO's wife, took a deep breath. She grabbed her purse and she opened the door. And the CO got out of the car, he put his cover on, and he got out and looked at me. And I knew in that instant, I said, Mark's dead. And they just said, well, wait, there's an investigation. We're not sure of anything. Let's talk. And I asked two questions. One, how fast was he going? And they said about 500 knots. And that's about the edge of the envelope for this plane. And then I said, well, how low was he going? And they said, about 200 feet off the water. I said, now, I knew in that instant that I wasn't going to see him again. But you see, I had a peace that passed all understanding that came over me right then. It was amazing, because I looked at them and I said, Mark went from flying his heaven straight into heaven. It was just this peace, because the day before in my Bible study with a bunch of other Navy wives, we had gone over Isaiah, and that was our memory verse. My thoughts are not your thoughts. Neither are your ways my ways. And I just knew that God had a plan. And this was his plan. It's amazing looking back. Hindsight is a really good thing. That is Mark and the two little boys and me. We went to Palma de Mallorca. He had left on cruise in February of that year. And we had never had a family vacation. I packed up the boys. We flew over to Spain. We had time together. It was a great little family time. Monte Carlo. So the ship was out to sea. I went home, and 3 or 4 months later, the CO's wife calls me, same CO, and she said, oh, the ship's pulling into Monte Carlo. Do you want to go? Yeah, sure I do. So I did what any good Navy wife would do. I sold as much stuff as I could. I had 2 or 3 garage sales. I sold antique furniture, you name it. I got enough to buy an economy class ticket. Things have changed. So right here is the Lowe's Casino, and it's this famous hotel. And out here, the aircraft carrier was sitting. It was, anchored out there. And I remember that night, we were in dinner looking out over the Bay of Monte Carlo, ships all lit up, and Mark turned to me and he said, if I died tonight, I'd die a happy man. Okay. Didn't think anything of it. Then he comes home about 3 or 4 months later. It was a long cruise. And I did what any good Navy wife would do. I handed him the 2 boys and said, they're yours. I'm out of here. And I went shopping. There was still another problem. Mark had gotten to spend time with the family on a vacation. We had like a little honeymoon in Monte Carlo, and he got to spend daddy time with his boys. But his parents and his brothers had had a big fight, and they didn't want anything to do with each other. If Joseph's here, he can check out those shorts. What were the times thinking? So I asked for them to go ahead and come down, and they reconciled, and everything was okay with his parents finally. So God had a plan. Because on December 11th, 1984, Mark left the house that early morning, and he never came home. He flew into the water 46 miles southwest of Pensacola. It was a morning where the sea and the sky were welded together. And that should be ringing a bell for my Heart of Darkness people. Isabella, Taylor, Ian, no, Jacob? Okay, you need to know that. So he left that morning and didn't come back. And I had to do some really tough things that day. I had to tell my two little boys that Daddy wasn't coming home again. But God gave me these tools of independence and courage and responsibility. And that day I had to plan 2 memorial services, one in Florida and one in Arlington. And I was kind of a little disagreeable because the Navy has a set plan that you do for a memorial service because they do these a lot. And so, they have to go through the certain things. And the last thing they do is sing the Navy hymn. And I said, nope, I don't want that. It's too sad. We'll sing it, but not at the end. And so as I'm planning the service, I called my pastor and I said, I really want the people there to hear the gospel because a lot of these guys don't go to church, and I want them to know Mark's life. So sure enough, he preached the gospel, and at the very end, we did sing the Navy hymn. I did give in to tradition. But instead of leaving on a sad note, I wanted the people to have an upbeat note. And so we sang, "Because He Lives." Because He lives, Mark was in heaven. Because He lives, I could face tomorrow. And so there's a great verse, and it's about not grieving like people who have no hope. I had hope. My hope was in Christ. I knew Mark was in heaven, and I knew I was going to be okay because God had a plan. That's a missing man formation. And the military, the Navy in particular, they fly this at memorial services or funerals. What it is you've got a squadron, a family, and they're flying along, and of course the missing man, the aviator who has fallen, peels off. And now there's a gap in that missing formation. There's just a big gap, a hole. And that's kind of like what I had. But God had a plan. Yes. 34 years, that wonderful man has been married to me. Don't ask me how or why. Probably because he was gone a lot. And so God had a plan. He had a plan for these 2 little boys. This happened on the day the boys got back from the courthouse. They changed their name because we weren't going to have any steps in our family. We were going to be one family. God had another plan. He brought in 2 little girls into our life. And that happened to be a day, Jack had been gone for 6 months on a cruise, and they just flown in. And the girls, the boys, they hadn't seen him in 6 months. Let me tell you, that little girl wasn't about to let him go. God had a plan. It was pretty amazing. My 2 boys followed in their father's footsteps. One son, a naval aviator, he was a helicopter pilot, and the other son, a Marine with 2 tours in Afghanistan. God had a plan for all of us. And the plan was to glorify God. Because you see, Mark's story ended in death, but he had been in a discipleship group, kind of like y'all, D groups here. And he was able to share the gospel with his friends and people in the military. And through Mark's death and his story and my story and our family's story, hundreds of people were able to hear the gospel. God had a plan. Yep, I'm here. He had a plan that I could come and teach some of the most wonderful students, and especially the Fabulous Four. And God had a plan for me to be here. Don't know how long, but I'm here. God always has a plan. One of the things that struck me when I first got here after a couple of years, there was a young man, and he was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. And his sophomore year, I didn't know him because I don't really deal with sophomores that much. And he kept coming by my office. And he'd talk every once in a while to me. And then over time, he kept talking and talking. And we got to know each other. And when he knew it wasn't going to go well for him, he came in one day and he sat down and he said, "Mrs. Stewart, I'm going to die. I know that. But I have hope in Christ. I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about my family. And I was able to share my story with him. And that made him feel so much better because he knew his parents had hope in Christ. God had a plan for me to be here to talk with Neil. God has a plan for all of you. And that's what you need to know today. God has a plan. And you know, when I think of Christmas, I don't think of sadness, and I don't think of a bad time. When I look at Christmas lights, I really look at individual lights, knowing that those are people that have been touched by the stories, by Mark's story, by my story, by my family's story. You know, God is there for you, and he wants the best. Sometimes I didn't always follow the best, kind of like you. You don't always know, you know which way to go, but you kind of go this way. God has a plan for you, and you are to be the light of the world. And that's what I think you need to do, is even in your darkest hour, God can take your biggest mess-ups, your stupid mistakes, and work it for his glory. So today, go out and be the light of the world. You now can go to lunch. Put my